Hey guys, what's going on? It's your good buddy Sam, and today we're going to talk about some more Max. Although I gotta tell you, being here at Max 6, it's cool and all. I mean, I'm a big fan of Max 6, but as a Cycling 74 insider, I've been playing all morning with cool, futuristic, bleeding edge pre-alpha versions of Max 7, and man oh man, is there some cool stuff going on up in that joint. But more on that later. For now, let's revisit this patch that we were looking at last time. Patch, did I tell you could talk? Did I say you could talk? No, get in the corner. So this is the quote-unquote Aute-Curves patch that we were looking at last week, and as you may or may not recall, the original looked like this. Oh, patch, how you beguile us with your hide on lock. Yes, this is what the original patch looked like, and this is what the cleaned up version of the patch looked like. If you were around last week, we had a very zen, we had like kind of a zen rock garden contemplation tutorial last time where basically I just talked about nonsense and cleaned up the patch, and this is the result. So what I want to do ultimately is take this cleaned up version, and you can see we've actually broken it into some nice little chunks, and I'm basically just going to go chunk by chunk by chunk and explain how this thing works, and hopefully rearrange it into a form where you know, a few more parameters are exposed and we can improvise with it. You know, as it is, it's just something where you push go and then listen. That's cool and all, but you know, we're way too cool. We're hackers, right? You and the audience, we're hackers, and we refuse to accept what we're given. Push play and enjoy? I don't think so. Got to co-opt that shit. Occupy Max, am I right? So before we can do that, I really just want to start by talking about what's going on here from sort of a foundational level, because really there's one trick kind of being used in 18 different ways. Not even. There's really just one trick that drives this whole patch, and this little chunk right here is pretty emblematic of it. What we have going on, more or less, we have a single phaser, phaser E in this case. Phaser E is being used to generate two envelopes, one envelope here, another envelope here. This envelope is being applied as applied to this cycle object here, and what this envelope is doing is driving a frequency sweep. So the value starts out very high and very quickly exponentially sweeps down to 0, or to 50 I guess in this case, because of this clip object here, and that makes the frequency of the cycle go from very high to very low very fast. You know, so like a pew kind of thing, although way faster. And this envelope here is being applied to the sound. It actually cuts off the sound, or rather, it's being applied as an amplitude envelope. So you have the cycle here, and you know, you only hear it. Is it going to be on? Yeah, but there's all this other sound getting in the way, man. All right, I got to turn that off. As you can hear, it's not a continuous drone. What's coming out of the cycle is, of course, just a continuous drone, and this curve object applies some amplitude envelope to it so that you actually hear discrete notes. So let's take a deeper look at how this works. I'm just going to grab this and also grab phaser E over here. Copy that, close this, make a new patcher, and paste it in. So let's take a good look at this. So all you need to do to really understand what's going on here is think about shape. So let's start with phaser E here. Phaser E, receive phaser E. Why don't I just copy this thing, man? Phaser E is just a signal going from 0 to 1 over the course of 1.25 seconds. So it looks like this. Just a continuous ramp up from 0 to 1. Now, if you look over here, you'll see that phaser value is going into this log object here, and you may be thinking, wow, it's a lot of objects, what is all that garbage doing? All it's doing is taking this phaser and giving it a different shape. So instead of ramping from 0 to 1, it's ramping from 10,000 down to 50 exponentially very fast. And all these objects do is achieve that change of shape. So to understand this, just think about the shape. So what goes into this log here is a number between 0 and 1. All that logarithm does, logarithm basically asks a question. It's saying, given the input, what number do I need to raise 2048 to get that number? And the thing you should know about logarithms is that for any number between 0 and 1, the logarithm of that number is always going to be negative. And in fact, the logarithm of 0 is always negative infinity. So the output of this logarithm is just going to be something that looks kind of like this. you can see here what it looks like, and these actually do line up. You can see it's just something that ramps from minus infinity up to, but never quite reaching 0. So it's given a different shape to what's coming out of this phasor. Now, multiplying by 70, of course, just makes that thing a lot taller. It basically increases the amount of space underneath this curve here. And after you've done that and passed this all through the absolute value, what comes out on the other end, this is a very deceptive looking graph right here. This phasor is actually just totally wrong. I'm not sure what's going on here. I think the phasor is goofed. That's not what that number actually looks like. It's something that actually goes from positive infinity down towards 0. Basically the negation of this with a steeper slope. Now, taking the minus 1200 here just shifts the whole curve downward, and clipping here clips the value to be obviously between 50 and minus 10,000. So what does all that mean for us? All that means for us is that what goes into this cycle is going to be something that starts very positive and ramps down towards 0 very quickly. The interesting question for us here is how we can affect this sound. So let's listen to it again. We actually need to push these things to initialize everything. What can we do to change the sound? Right now it's this very deep sound. Well, obviously we could change the, we could put into clip here a different value for the smallest, for the minimum level. You know, we could make this something like 100 instead of 50. And now, because this cycle never gets any lower than that value, we actually hear our drum sound, basically, having a different resonance. This is what I'm talking about, by the way, with breaking the patch down and understanding it so that you can have, by understanding this patch, we're going to have more control over the patch, and we're going to be able to improvise with the sound, which is cool. So what about this log here? Well, the value of this logarithm, here it's 2048, is essentially the steepness of this curve. And you can see that if we make this logarithm in some logarithm's a hard word, man. If we make it something like 10, you can see it changes the slope of this thing to be much more gradual. In fact, at 1, it's super gradual. No, at 1 it just doesn't work. At 2, it's super gradual, and you can hear us ramping down nice and slow all the way to 100. And then by the time you get up to 2048, it's basically instantaneous, right? We're going from 10,000 down to 50 so quickly that you don't hear a sweep, you just hear the transient. Okay, now if we look at this minus 1200 here, what that's doing is affecting how quickly we actually get to 0, how quickly we actually get to that lowest frequency. So if I make this 0, you can hear we never quite get there, right? We're ramping down the whole time. As I make this larger and larger, we're reaching that cutoff and hitting that resonance sooner. So these are kind of the 3 parameters that we have to play around with here. I've gone ahead and put in over here some labels and ranges for these values. Okay, so that's the sweeping part of this program. Throw the resonance back down to 50 so it sounds better. And up this. Yeah, there's the kick we wanted, right? Who wants a frequency sweep, man? Give me some kick drum. So over here, all we're doing is generating a exponential curve. And this is what I'm talking about. This is one way to generate an exponential curve. This is the exact same way to generate an exponential curve, man. So here's what the curve object looks like. Now, what's interesting here, so you can see this is 0.8. This means jump up to the value 0.8 and then ramp down to 0 over the course of 5 seconds. This curve object here, this value we're passing in is the curve parameter. And the curve parameter affects the shape of this curve. So we can make this any value between 1 and minus 1. It happens to be 0.9 now, which gives it that ramp down. But you could make this like 0.5. And that totally changes the shape of the attack. Let's try minus 5. Yeah, it's, oh, minus 5 is, I meant minus 0.5. Yeah, you can see it's ramping down way too slowly. Or, I don't know, too slowly if you actually want to hear it, if you actually want to have it stop. So we're modulating the decay time, basically, by changing this parameter here. So I'll call this decay time. Now, the last thing that's really interesting about this phasor here, or this whole arrangement here, is you'll notice that this envelope here is being generated directly from the phasor. We are taking the phasor values and actually remapping them to a different range and using that to drive our cycle. But over here, we're generating bangs from the phasor and then using those to modulate, or rather to send messages to this curve object, which then generates this ramp. Why? Why is a great question. This could be used to generate this envelope could be used over here. There is no good reason to do it one way or the other. I think this approach is basically simpler, and you can get the same result doing it either way. One thing that's interesting about doing it this way is that it causes some interesting kind of modulations from note to note. So if you take a look at this phasor object over here, what's going on is the phasor is being fed into this delta object. Delta measures the difference between successive signal values. So as this phasor ramps from 0 up to 1, this delta object is always reporting some small positive value until phasor jumps from 1 back down to 0, and then the value coming out of this delta will be -1. Basically a click. In fact, why don't we just look at that delta, and you'll see what I'm talking about. See, there it is. Delta is basically always a very small value until phasor wraps around, and then it spikes to a very large negative value. You feed that into this less than 0 object, and instead of a very small value, you get a spike. Edge tilde basically detects spikes and reports them as bangs, and that's what's going here to this curve object to drive the curve. Now, what's cool about all that is by going from the signal domain to the message domain and back, it means that this amplitude this envelope here doesn't quite line up on a signal accurate level with the phase transitions in this phasor, not really phase transitions, with the wraparounds in this phasor and with the phase of this cycle object. And what that does is it means you can hear very slight variations from note to note as this kick drum goes on. See if you can see what I mean. Listen especially to the transient right at the beginning. Maybe you can hear it. Sometimes that transient is very bright, sometimes it's a little bit darker. That's all a function of this kind of interaction between the scheduler and the DSP and all that stuff. But this, I just want to emphasize again, this is basically the entire patch. It's basically the entire guiding principle, so to speak, behind that Aute-Curve patch. And if you understand how this works, you can understand how that whole other patch works and why it's working the way it does. These fundamental principles, taking a phasor, using it to generate an envelope that drives a cycle, and also detecting the wraparounds in the phasor to drive a curve object to make an envelope, multiplying those together to shape an oscillator is basically the entire patch, and that's how it works. And obviously if you come from a modular patching background, this could all be super familiar to you, but in Max it's not necessarily the way we do things, and so it's good to kind of back up and understand it this way. So hopefully that was helpful, and I mean, if you stick around and as we go through the rest of the patch, I guarantee it will be helpful, but also just in the context of understanding signal processing. I hope that was useful. So again, thanks for watching, and be on the lookout for a deeper look into that Aute-Curve patch, and I'll see you guys soon. Oh, and again, Wednesdays, man, I'm trying to do this sort of podcast with my sister where we listen to music and talk about it, and it's cool. Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific time. You should come hang out with us. Mixler.com/flotsam. It's been a pretty good time so far. Okay, guys, take it easy. I'll see you next time.